Param vijayate Shri Krishna Sankirtanam, total world victory of Hare Krishna. My name is Sitapati Das, and this is Bhagavad-gita 127 to 28. If you find this useful, valuable, interesting, please send it along to a friend, and remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Bhagavad-gita 127. Tan samīkṣya sa kaunteyaḥ sarvān bandhūn avasthitān kṛpayā parayāviṣṭo viṣīdann idam abravīt. Tan, all of them. Samīkṣya, after seeing. Saha, he. Kaunteyaḥ, the son of Kuntī. Sarvān, all kinds of. Bandhūn, relatives. Avasthitān, situated. Kṛpayā, by compassion. Parayā, of a high grade. Āviṣṭaḥ, overwhelmed. Viṣīdann, while lamenting. Idam, thus. Abravīt, spoke. Translation. When the son of Kuntī, Arjuna, saw all these different grades of friends and relatives, he became overwhelmed with compassion and spoke thus. No purport for text 27, so let's move on to text 28. Arjuna uvāca dṛṣṭvemaṁ sva-janaṁ kṛṣṇa yuyutsuṁ samupasthitam sīdanti mama gātrāṇi mukam ca parushuṣyati. Arjuna uvāca, Arjuna said, dṛṣṭva, after seeing, imam, all these, sva-janaṁ, kinsmen, kṛṣṇa, O Krishna, yuyutsuṁ, in a fighting spirit, samupasthitam, present, sīdanti, are quivering, mama, my, gātrāṇi, limbs of the body, mukam, mouth, cha, also, parushuṣyati, is drying up. Translation. Arjuna said, my dear Krishna, seeing my friends and relatives present before me in such a fighting spirit, I feel the limbs of my body quivering and my mouth drying up. Purport. Any man who has genuine devotion to the Lord has all the good qualities which are found in godly persons or in the demigods, whereas the non-devotee, however advanced he may be in material qualifications by education and culture, lacks in godly qualities. As such, Arjuna, just after seeing his kinsmen, friends, and relatives on the battlefield, was at once overwhelmed by compassion for them who had so decided to fight amongst themselves. As far as his soldiers were concerned, he was sympathetic from the beginning, but he felt compassion even for the soldiers of the opposite party, foreseeing their imminent death. And while he was so thinking, the limbs of his body began to quiver, and his mouth became dry. He was more or less astonished to see their fighting spirit. Practically the whole community, all blood relatives of Arjuna, had come to fight with him. This overwhelmed a kind devotee like Arjuna. Although it is not mentioned here, still, one can easily imagine that not only were Arjuna's bodily limbs quivering and his mouth drying up, but he was also crying out of compassion. Such symptoms in Arjuna were not due to weakness, but to his soft-heartedness, a characteristic of a pure devotee of the Lord. It is said, therefore, yasyasti bhaktir bhagavatya kinchana sarvair gunais tatra samasata suraha harava bhaktasya kuto mahad guna manoratena sati dhavato bahi. Mano ratena sati dhavato bahi. One who has unflinching devotion for the personality of Godhead has all the good qualities of the demigods. But one who is not a devotee of the Lord has only material qualifications that are of little value. This is because he is hovering on the mental plane and is certain to be attracted by the glaring material energy. Arjuna uvāca dṛṣṭvemaṁ sva-janaṁ kṛṣṇa yuyutsuṁ samupasthitam sīdanti mama gātrāṇi mukkam ca parishuṣyati. Arjuna said, "My dear Krishna, seeing my friends and relatives present before me in such a fighting spirit, I feel the limbs of my body quivering and my mouth drying up. Om jnanatimidandasya jnananjana shalakaya chakshur unmilitam yena tasmai sri gurave namaha." As mentioned previously, Srila Prabhupada attends to the listening of Arjuna in the first chapter of Bhagavad-gita, which is where many of the readers of Srila Prabhupada's Bhagavad-gita as it is encounter Arjuna for the very first time. Readers of the Mahabharata, of course, are familiar with all of the events and the character development that led to this point. But Western readers, coming to the Mahabharata for the very first time in this episode, the conversation on the battlefield of Kurukshetra between Arjuna and Kṛṣṇa, see Arjuna for the very first time. They have no idea of who Arjuna is as a character. What makes this conversation between Kṛṣṇa and Arjuna so shocking is that it represents a complete departure from the character arc of Arjuna at this point. It's the crucial battle, the final battle between the sons of Pandu and the sons of Dhritarashtra, which will resolve the long-standing feud of the succession to the royal house of Kuru. The Pandavas have been in exile for years, and decades have passed in the total arc of this journey to this point. Everything's about to be resolved, and at the crucial moment, Arjuna suddenly falters, which is like a plot twist like no other. Arjuna breaking down on the chariot. Now, if you encounter Arjuna here for the first time, you're just like, okay, this guy, seems like a bit of a wimp, You might think that. So, Srila Prabhupada takes great care in these purports from this section onwards to paint the nature of Arjuna's breakdown. It's not because this is what he does every time. And for readers encountering Arjuna in this situation after having seen his character, it's shocking to see this happen to him. What is going on? So they also can benefit from understanding this. The soft-heartedness of Arjuna. My friend Cam posted something about forgiveness the other day. And Prabhupada attends to this a lot in talking about Arjuna's character at this point. Forgiveness, yes. Cowardice, no. Forgive them and put them to death. Which means without attachment. Without being motivated by anger or... See, Arjuna's... When he does... spoiler alert, Arjuna ends up fighting. But he obviously does so not on the other side of just simply thoughtless anger and as a reaction. He's been through the full spectrum of response, and he's gone from, I will not react, oh Govinda, I will not fight. But there's something beyond that. Fighting without attachment. From the platform of duty. That's where Arjuna will end up. So Prabhupada, he makes... he goes to great pains to paint this picture in the purports. Such symptoms in Arjuna were not due to weakness, but due to his soft-heartedness. Yeah, he doesn't want to, but he's going to do it anyway. It's just like raising children, you don't necessarily want to, make them go to school and they're crying, whatever, and you're like, you have to do it, whatever it might be, right? Something that is in their long-term interest. But in order for you to stand for the long-term interest of someone, you have to, deal with their resistance to that in the short term. And they're not going to appreciate it. But doing things just so you're appreciated by people is, let's take this off for a second. Doing things just so that you're appreciated by people is a form of attachment. It's called pratishta, the desire for being liked and for having a good reputation. Prabhupada quotes this verse from the Bhagavad-gita 5:18-12. Let me have a look at this. Let me find the original text for this 5:18-12, because I have a feeling that 5:18-12. I have a feeling that Srila Prabhupada's translation that he gives in the Bhagavad-gita, which was done before he translated that and published that canto, 5:18-12, differs from the translation that he eventually uses in here. Yeah, it does. So let's bring it up so we can see it. Here, Srila Prabhupada translates this verse by saying, one who has unflinching devotion for the personality of Godhead has all the good qualities of the demigods. But one who is not a devotee of the Lord has only material qualifications that are of little value. Sarvā gunas, all of the qualities, tatra samasita sura, of the demigods. Harav avaktasya, but that who has no bhakti to Hari, kuto mahad guna, no matter how great their things are, mano uratena sati davato bahi. Kutaha. And here? Kutaha. Okay, so we can, let's look it up here. Where? Good qualities, okay. With all good qualities of the demigods. Kutas tva kajmalam idam. Where from have these come from? Abhaktasya, a person who's not devoted unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Interesting. Okay, so in here, Srila Prabhupada says, on the other hand, a person devoid of devotional service and engaged in material activity has no good qualities. In the translation that he's given here, the rendering of it, he says, has only material qualifications that are of little value. Whereas here, he goes even further, has no good qualities. He must be driven by his own mental speculations, manoratena, okay, and must engage in the service of the Lord's external energy. Mahat guna. So if you have a look at it, the Sanskrit, actually it says of whom there is devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, akinchana, unmotivated. All the good qualities of the demigods are there. But one who has no devotion to the Supreme Lord Hari, where are the good qualities? Kuto mahad guna. Where are the good qualities? He has to follow his mental speculation. His mind drives him in the temporary material world, asat. Dhavato bahi, he's just running after the external thing. Where are the good qualities? So it's kind of like and then Prabhupada has given it here at the end. How can there be any good qualities in such a man? It's like a rhetorical question. The way that this is, Harava bhaktasya kuto mahad guna. Where are the good qualities in someone who has no devotion to the Supreme Lord? Manorata nasati davato bahi. He follows mental speculation and running after the material energy. He's attracted by the glaring effulgence of the external energy. The illusion is just running after these temporary, distracting kind of sideshow, so he doesn't have any good qualities. I quoted that verse at the very beginning of an article that I wrote in 2006, right at the very beginning, called What is Really Going On, where I made the case that, you know, the Bhaktivedanta historical dialectic, the non-devotees, the asuras and the devas, the division of the world into the devas and the asuras. Okay, interesting. So in the case where I quoted the verse in that article, I was making the case that the non-devotees have no good qualities. Simply cheating from the asuras, and then the cheated, people following along with that, the non-devotees. Prabhupada is using it in the sense here of the first half. Yas yasti bhaktir bhagavatya kinchana sarvai gunais tatra samasita sura. That in Arjuna, all the good qualities are there, in the devotees, they have all the good qualities. How devotees came to praise the asuric governments of these countries, you know, who were before the cheaters and the cheated, the blind leading the blind, hogs, dogs, camels and asses. Suddenly in 2020, these governments became like the saviors of the people and like instruments of the Supreme Lord. It was madness, a mad recontextualization of the world. I stayed true to the Sankhya that we've always had, which is the non-devotees have no good qualities. Oh, it's fanaticism, it's religious extremism. Sorry, it's just as it is. It's the thing as it is. These people are working in service of the external energy of the Lord, which means they're following the agenda of the asuras. They're a combination of the asuras themselves, like dedicatedly evil, and innocent human beings who are, you know, just swept up in it. Yesterday I had a discussion with some friends and in one comment thread, and you know, Will had said about one of my earlier classes, it sounds like neo-Nazi stuff. I have done a very, very in-depth study of Nazi Germany. Like to the extent of, you know, I have Adolf Hitler's collected speeches from the earliest recorded one right up until 1945, and just studying it, like, how did such a thing happen? What did it look like while you were there? Why did people go along with it? Like, what are the actual valid points? Because it's easy now where you can just say something like, that sounds like Nazi stuff, and then, you know, everyone knows that means that it's bad. But, I mean, even you had, like, in the United States, the American Nazi Party. And, you know, there was, like, a question of which side of the war the US would enter on, whether they would enter on Germany's side. They stayed neutral in the beginning because they're like, you know, there was public opinion was so divided in America about which side of the war America would enter into. Now, of course, now with the victors write the history, it's like the Nazis are definitely the bad guys. Unless you can explain how it could occur for people that their cause was like justified and right, and then separate out the post-war propaganda from what it looked like at the time, you can't actually understand what it looked like. Now, this is not to make an argument that, you know, the Nazis were on the right side of history. People can make that argument. That's not the argument that I'm making. The argument that I'm making here, the point I'm making, is that when you're inside the historical moment, it does not look like it looks from, you know, hindsight. Hindsight is 2020. You know, how far are we away from the Second World War? 1945. My father was born yesterday in 1950, 5 years after it finished. He was 73, his 73rd birthday yesterday, 5 years after, so 78 years. 78 years ago. Now, in 78 years' time, it's entirely possible that people will look back at this historical moment and say there was just a massive propaganda campaign waged on humanity during this period, and people really bought into it, and it was all a lie. That's entirely possible. And one of the things that makes that entirely possible is the moment from inside looks like what we just went through. Massive, sustained government propaganda aimed at the people to convince them that this is the right thing to do. And then you even had, I remember at the very beginning of it, my friend Paul Seals was posting these memes and stuff about people getting onto the cattle cars to go to Treblinka and Auschwitz, in the Second World War, and comparing that to like the coming vaccinations, because it was before even the vaccines had been developed. But this guy was like calling out that, hey man, this is like getting people to get onto the cattle cars like the Second World War. And I thought at the time, dude, this guy's like a full-on far-out extremist comparing this to the Nazis. But on reflection, over the last 3 years and analyzing it and looking at it, I'm like, yeah, you know what? That could be a valid comparison. And in fact, I lean towards the interpretation that, yeah, actually it is. You had the Pandavas, the 5 of them, and you have the 100 sons of Dhritarashtra headed by Duryodhana on the other side. There's no division between those sons. They're the 100 sons. They're all together, and they got Bhishma and they got Drona. They got the full legitimacy and the weight of the government behind them. Massive propaganda. Then you have these conspiracy theorists, the Pandavas, who have this conspiracy theory that Duryodhana is usurping the kingdom and that they're the rightful heirs. And they're in the minority. But history proves them to be on the right side of history, if you will. So, this situation here, this Bhagavad-gita, this scenario here, it's very instructive about the internal dynamics. Like, you must be wrong because there's only a few of you and you're fringe extremists. The Pandavas are fringe extremists fighting against the established government and a unified majority of the symbols of legitimacy and the majority of society. That's the situation they're in. And then Arjuna, he has to deal with his own psychological state. And, in speaking with various people, leaders and participants, leaders at different levels of people who have been standing against the majority consensus opinion. And in cases where it's clearly been violating dharma, and it's like most of the people seem to think that it's okay to take this adharmic action. But I need to stand against this. And then they have to deal with their own self-doubt. And the fact that they're like, people are saying, why can't we just get along? Why do you want to create such division? It's like, I didn't create this division. Imagine if the Kauravas said that, the Duryodhana and Bhishma and Drona, why are you Pandavas creating this division? Why don't you just go along with this? Do whatever Duryodhana wants. Give him the kingdom. Just go along with it. You see, you're creating a division here. Now, you see, what's happened there is you've changed away from the principle of like, we must follow dharma no matter what, to we should be unified, and because you are not going along with our dharma, you are creating division. It's like, I'm not creating division. You are acting adharmically, and then you're trying to like browbeat or bully me into going along with it, and I'm not going to go along with that. And then you got to deal with your own psychological state, Depending on the psychological makeup of the yantra or the material body and mind that you have, you may be more or less predisposed towards going against the grain. And I freely admit that I have an advantage in this environment in that, psychologically my character is constructed as a rebel. That actually really works in my favor in this situation. But even in that situation, I have still had to deal with over these last 3 years, like the existential crisis, the kind of thing that Arjuna's going through. And I've found great solace in being able to identify with Arjuna's character in a way that I never had been able to before this whole COVID kind of thing. The whole socio-political transformation masquerading as a public health emergency. And I have a lot of compassion or empathy for leaders who have been dealing with this over the last few years. Being overwhelmed by compassion, for people injecting themselves with a poison. And, you might be like, oh, the jury's out on that. The thing is that at the very least, the jury is out on that. It's scientifically impossible to state whether it is safe and effective because no long-term studies have been done. Simulations, parallel studies, all that kind of stuff. Scientifically, to be honest and scientific about it, it is unknown what the long-term effects are. What are the long-term implications? There are no large-scale long-term studies done. And the way the whole thing has been constructed, it's not even possible for them to do that now. Because mandating these injections across the entire population means there is absolutely no desire to have a control group. They have no intention of measuring the long-term effects of these things. What is the aggregate effect on a large-scale population? Like, what do these injections do to the incidences or the aggressiveness of cancer? There's no way to measure that now because you can pin any changes in incidence of cancer or long-term health outcomes to people on anything. Changes in the health system due to the economic transformation, changes in the number of calories that people are getting because of the change to inflation, like the stress levels that people have, people not traveling as much there's so many multivariate factors now that it's impossible to isolate the effect of the injections because you don't have a control group. It was done in such a way that they had zero interest in science. None. It was all marketing. It's not scientific method at all. And so sensitive people, soft-hearted people, seeing this happening to the human population have been in a lot of anguish over the last few years. Me, not so much of that. I'm like, if people are stupid enough to go along with this, they deserve whatever they're going to get. Cull the herd, I say. And in that way, I'm kind of like, people like, they would never do it. And I'm like, yeah, they would, man, because there are people who are like, have the same psychological orientation that I do. And that's like, let these people who are that foolish, do we really need them? And as I watched from 2017 onwards, how they began to automate everything, I was looking at it and I was like, dude, a lot of people are about to become surplus to requirement of the economy. And what are they going to do about that? Oh, they wouldn't do that. Yeah, they would, man. It's funny how people can simultaneously have this idea that, these kind of asuric demonic leaders, they're responsible for like genocide and for colonial, like exterminating the indigenous people, and they don't care about them, and like they do all the exploit the people and everything, but they would never do that to us. It's like, us? What do you mean we, white man? These people don't think of you as being in the same class as them. So of course they're going to do that. These are the asuras. The asuras, they are ruthless. They have no compassion. So yeah, Arjuna, he's experiencing this, but he can't let that be his driving, and these are the good qualities of the devotees. And yes, I have experienced those kind of things myself, particularly when I was at Profest, and I wept every day there. The humanity, the inhumanity, the courage that people displayed, their commitment. What really impacts me the most is even when I myself are like, I can identify with Bill Gates, the Bill Gates evil character, like we need to get rid of the useless people. When I talk with these leaders who have been standing against this and have been putting themselves up at issue and accepting great personal austerity and inconvenience, losing their jobs, losing their places to live, losing their friends and family, losing access to opportunities and access to the society around them. I'm touched, moved and inspired by their compassion and how they are driven by that and motivated by that in the decisions and the stand that they take in the world. I acknowledge and salute their courage and compassion. And also the struggle that they have with that. And, it's caused me to become more appreciative of what Arjuna is about to go through in this moment here. He is on the right side of history, and he still has to deal with his self-doubt and his compassion for the other side. And then standing on the other side of that, he has to take savage actions as a warrior and fight without attachment. And Krishna is going to take him through this conversation. And this conversation has never been more relevant for humanity than it is today. Param Vijayate Sri Krishna Sankirtanam, total world victory of Hare Krishna.